Absolutely. State potential.
What is it that makes artists enter destruction? And can society learn from artists who do engage in destruction?
And show that there were other pathways than just, for example, going into the art gallery system.
If artists destroy, why do they destroy? Why do they burn? Why do they mutilate themselves, which is at the moment a very ongoing activity in the art world? Well, these are very, very important questions for society to try and understand.
That's what you've been proposing.
Now, if they say, if I read 2 years ago in the garden in the sun, why should I stand now? Will they come on, follow me? Absolutely. That's what I believe in.
Absolutely.
So in a way, I'm absolved.
We may hurt people, we may hurt ourselves. Why do we do it? Because this was the fundamental challenge faced by Freud, yes? Who went a long way, more than most people, to face up to that. And he faced up to it in the most brilliant, I think, most brilliant and courageous manner. Throughout my life, you could say, I lived with destruction, some of it absolutely horrific, and knowledge of destruction. So it's not surprising to me that eventually it led to this concentrated, as it were, formulation of what destruction is and what it might be in relation to art. My whole desire, when I entered art at the age of 18, towards the end of the war, was to use art in relation to society, to, as it were, help society, help heal aspects of society. This was my constant intention. It wasn't just that I wanted to make art, I wanted to make art in order, in connection with social change. And again, it led, this desire, this feeling of necessity, led to a theory where art, I suggested, and I still do, could directly impinge on consciousness, could directly challenge, in a very extreme way, social habits. The idea that art is something to look at, something in museums, something to hang on a wall. This is something I rebelled against very, very, very strongly, obviously, again, for years before this point, Destruction is such a wide reality, it's a physical reality which we are all faced with. It will happen to us without question. And how it happens, and when it happens, we don't know, but we are continually seeing photographs like the one now. And so you can go on and on. You can describe the destruction of Nineveh, the Temple of Jerusalem, burned or bombarded. I mean, throughout history, fortresses being demolished one way or another, and inside, people starving to death. Yes, their bones, yes, they have disintegrated that way, yeah. In hospital, there are hundreds of thousands of ways of disintegrating people going through the motion.
You saw the Nurnberg rallies yourself. What at the time? Can you remember your feelings at the time?
It started before 1933, because before 1933, when I was much younger, they were already marching up and down Nurnberg, sometimes very large demonstrations of different parties. The Communist Party was the most powerful political party at that time. I believe, and they would be marching. You'd have the Social Democrats would be marching. You'd probably have the Nazis who were marching. And I saw all that from a very early age, i.e. from probably the age of 3 or 4, yes? So it isn't just the post-1933, when the Nazis were in power, that meant something to me. It all meant a lot to me. I was always very fascinated. In fact, there's a story that I once joined one of these marches when I was being very, very small, and I got a hiding when my mother found out and said, "Don't ever do that again." And that's my first political act. I don't know how old I was, but I was very, very small. And it is a fact. And I never joined a march since, not in Germany, certainly. But and remember, this is very, very important. The Nazis, when they came to power, they were dressed in a very ragged kind of ways, and every year the uniforms improved. This can be checked out in the chronology, and this is very important. And so year by year there was more power in the streets, yes, because they dressed more powerfully, and they were better organized in every direction, yes, and they used fashion. They made a fashion statement, yeah. And that is in the street, tens of thousands. I mean, you could go into the town, and all you could see was these marches. And that end of a big street, which actually we lived on, the longest street in Nurnberg, the Förderstraße. And there you could go left, and wherever you saw, there were blocks of SR, SS, and everything, every year, yeah? And then I would sometimes, I believe, though I cannot guarantee, venture to the actual rally, because again, we weren't supposed to be there, we Jews. Everybody should be there, but not we. So, but I did see it, I'm sure, rallies at that place, tens of thousands. And so, the power of the visual presentation had a very deep impact on me. Coupled with seeing the films, yes, dialectic interaction between the film, the art, and the real nature of the beast, as you might say, that affected me very deeply, and it went on affecting me when I came to England. I would remember that. I would go back in my mind to all that again and again and again. And as we have already discussed, it will have fed into the kind of art I would envisage doing. There was an art, a representation of power, and it affected me, and no doubt it affected others in Germany. In fact, the entire world, didn't it? In fact, the entire world, and ultimately led to this horrific war of World War II. And so when I entered art, I felt that I would express power, and the art that I would make would affect the world. And there was an analogy, there was a direct influence of my childhood experiences in Germany. But of course, these childhood experiences weren't, as it were, in a vacuum. They weren't a sealed container. The childhood experience continued as I lived year by year. Before the war started, I would be reading papers about Nazi Germany and seeing images of Hitler and so on. And on the radio, there would be endless talk of Hitler, and during the war, endless talk of Hitler, endless talk of the Nazis. So, in my mind, I would relive this past, ongoing. And when the war was over, Germany was still in the headlines, yes, endless reparations and war trials, on and on and on. So Germany was on my mind continuously, steadily, right through, until the present day. This week I was in the Goethe Institute reading German newspapers. And when you read German newspapers, you will always read about the Nazis. There's no day where in the leading papers, like Frankfurt Allgemeine, there isn't a review of a book about the war, or a review of a book about Hitler, or a review of a theater piece talking about the Nazis or about the Jews or about the Gypsies. Every day it is virtually impossible to read the FAZ, which is an extraordinary, highly cultivated and regarded as the leading newspaper in Germany. They will talk about the Nazis systematically. And perhaps it is systematic, perhaps it is to some extent intentional. And so whenever you read that kind of paper, you are in touch with the Nazis. I'm in touch with the Nazis. And of course, I don't mind. I think it's good that they should go on talking about the Nazis. And now, of course, whenever we talk of Israel, there will be people who will say, well, they're just Nazis, aren't they? That again is being discussed in the German media continuously, day by day. There's letters to the editor, how to respond to the new anti-Semitism. So it's a seamless web up to the present day. The impact of the Nazis on me as a child continue to the present day. The problematic, the discussion, the questions, the difficulties involved are there for life. That's till we die, we Jews will be involved in all that. And certainly the experience in Nurnberg was very formative for my whole life and for my art. The power of that experience stayed with me and influenced the way, for example, I formulated autodestructive art and these monuments to death that I wanted to make relate to the pyramids, if you like, of death, of which the Nazis, in a sense, created. You could see these columns as pyramids, yes, related to Mexico, I think. So units building up to an apex, yeah? The apex being, in this case, Hitler and his leading figures on a platform. So I think that's one way of sensing what goes on there in relation to past totalitarian and death-directed societies. And in one of the articles that you will have read, I speak of monuments, I think, to the power of death, monuments to the power of blotting out all life. Well, that comes from Nuremberg. That comes from Nazi Germany. And I know it has alienated a lot of people when they read that. But then this is a reality in me. It's a reality I experienced. And why shouldn't I state it? I think the point of being an artist, the point of art is to state experiences, to state intuitions, however horrible. What about Desart? Yes, Desart did, and we now feel had the right to write and say what he did. And we are now willing to accept all kinds of very extreme artistic, literary statements, film statements, especially film now. It's all about death, destruction, and the extremities, going beyond the extreme of human interaction. I haven't seen these films, but I read all the reviews. And of course, we all read the reviews, even if we don't see the films. So culture is now more and more accepting that art and artists have a freedom to state the unacceptable. And that's what I did then, in making these references to the power that art may have, yes? And I think that art should have that power. I think art should have the power within itself and the power to influence other people and influence the world. acid, adhesives, ballistics, canvas, metal, motion picture, clay, combustion, natural forces, compression, nuclear energy, paint, paper, concrete, corrosion, cybernetics, photography, drop, plaster, elasticity, plastics, electricity, electrolysis, electronics, explosives, pressure, radiation, sand, solar energy, sound, feedback, steam, stress, glass, heat, human energy, ice, terracotta, jet, vibrations, light, load, mass production, water, welding, wire, wood. That's a reference to me starting as a woodworker at the age of 16 in Leeds, 1941-42. You make something, you make it with the knowledge that in time it won't be there. And that is the fundamental objective. It has to disappear. It has to go off the face of the earth and vanish. That is the original drive. That was the first concept I had. You could make a sculpture which could last as long as 20 years. When I say as long as 20 years, people say, what do you mean as long? 20 years, that's no time. This is absurd. Why should the Arts Council or anybody put money into something which will only last for 20 years? Off with you, you're joking. Yeah. So again, it's very relative. The first acid nylon painting were done in a straightforward manner by using brushes. Not necessarily brushes you paint with, but brushes of some kind. There were two. One was an experiment, of which the illustrations are in the literature, and the second one was as a performance in front of an audience of 20, 30 people. There again, brushes were used. And so the first two were in 1960. The second one was about a year later, and that was radically different. Brushes were not used, or only in a minute part, and the principle was I would get a so-called flit gun, which was to kill insects, partly fill it with the same acid that I'd used before, hydrochloric, and pump. So I would have to have a gas mask, some kind of reasonably protective clothing, and I would stand there for about 25 minutes, pumping, and that's what I was talking about. These droplets would hit one side, go through, and then go into space. That is the South Bank demonstration of 61. And that is the high point of it all. After that, I hardly ever did this again. The acid painting, it was kind of a finished item. I was, as you will know, asked to reproduce the South Bank in Los Angeles in '98, which I did, and not too successfully, but we did give it a try. And I think it's probably the last time I would try it. Yeah.
What happened to the original ones?
The South Bank, it simply was almost completely burned out. There was 90% loss of 80 to 90% of the material, and it was put onto a frame. The frame was dismantled, and that was that. It's photographs. That's all that's left. Which is the intention. It was never meant to be preserved. Of course not. June 23rd, 1961. Autodestructive art, machine art, auto-creative art. Each visible fact absolutely expresses its reality. Certain machine produced forms are the most perfect forms of our period. In the evenings, some of the finest works of art are dumped on the streets of Soho. Auto-creative art is art of change, movement, growth. Auto-destructive art and auto-creative art aim at the integration of art with the advances of science and technology. The immediate objective is the creation, with the aid of computers, of works of art whose movements are programmed and include, quote, self-regulation, unquote. The spectator, by means of electronic devices, can have a direct bearing on the action of these works. Autodestructive art is an attack on capitalist values and the drive to nuclear annihilation. I'm still very, very interested in the theory of autodestructive art. There it is. It's ready, it's waiting and willing, yeah? Ready and willing. There's a pop song along these lines of the 50s, I believe, yeah, which I used to sing, happily sing. In Norfolk, I think. Ready and willing. Little Richard, of course, Little Richard. Great song and a great singer. So there I am, I'm ready and willing. Off, give me a podium, give me a platform, off I go. Only £100,000 to start with. Peanuts these days. So I'm still in it, in the mind, only I'm not doing it, I'm not working on it. I feel if they don't want it, this is how I've looked at it. I offer something to society. That's how I've talked for years when I was in it. I'm offering something to society. If they don't want it, what should I do? Kill myself? Go around like a mad manager and ask, managing, it could be managed, but I'm not a managing type, and I'm not a pusher, yeah? And I don't work with galleries. If I worked with galleries, there would be 10 monuments because they'd all have an interest in these monuments that build up my name. They would get a cut of but I'm not in that sphere by choice. And so, but I'm still here. And the world could benefit. You can theorize about autodestructive art as I've done, and as have others. There's a big literature by now quite a literature on the subject. But it's nothing like the real thing. How can you respond to a work of art if you're not actually physically in front of it? And that's been one of the great problems. I could say, as I've done, it's significant. It will add to the potential in aesthetics and in social sense. But unless you have it and people, it's all in the mind and all on paper and reaches a very limited circle. So I'm in a kind of a time warp, a time trap, as far as that is concerned. So it's still important to me, but it's on paper, it's in print so far. I see no reason why I should speculate into the future beyond, say, my lifetime or the lifetime of people living today. And in that time frame, then I certainly believe fully in art and artists, fully. And actually, I'm a strong believer in art. People have often expressed surprise. Oh, you're a destroyer, aren't you? You're a destroyer, and you want to get rid of art. Well, I always calmly say, not at all. I'm perhaps one of the strongest believers in art, in being artists, and in producing, contributing within the frame of all the arts. And I think that's right. I think that's how it is and how it should be. 200 years from now, well, it could be that it withers away. If we are lucky and get a kind of balanced society, certainly some of the kind of hysteria that you see in the art world today will have withered away, I would expect. And speaking of that, today what is happening, we earlier talked about it's a great period to be alive, but it has its horrible moments when you have sensation seekers, when people who are simply desperate to present their person, their persona, above all, above even their own art, and continuously interacting and exploiting and being manipulated by the mass media. I think that is a rather sad phase of history that we are witnessing, especially in this country, which seems to be leading that personality cult of the youngish Brit art.